Scavengers Reign is a sci-fi animated drama about various different crew members of an interplanetary cargo ship that have been shipwrecked on an uncharted alien planet, each landing in different areas of the planet and attempting to journey their way back onto the ship they came in. Now, this already released a while ago, like October of last year, a while ago, and I really wish I had just made a video on it back when it was releasing, like I have so many other animated shows and films, but I didn't because I'm a fucking idiot and I was working on something else at the time, so I didn't get the chance. But so that begs the question of why I'm talking about it now. Is this just another example of me not having a good enough work ethic to finish a video about a topic before it stops trending? Well, you see, it's actually kind of interesting. The thing about this show is that it's actually really good. Probably one of the best animated shows America's ever produced, and I do not say that lightly. And because it was just, so great, nobody fucking watched it. But that's not all, you see, because the real problem was just that it was just too good, Keep in mind, this originally released on HBO Max. What the fuck do you mean your show is actually well directed and written? Fuck you! We're going to cancel your show and then remove it off our streaming service despite being an in-house production because we just desperately need those sweet, delicious, succulent tax deductions from our already multi-billion-dollar company. God, I just love the entertainment industry so much. I am definitely not going to firebomb various sectors of 4000 Warner Boulevard, Burbank, California on July 29th, 2024. So anyways, now the show's being moved over to Netflix, which, hear me out on this, might actually be a good thing. Even though Netflix has had kind of a dodgy reputation in the past, with this, you're getting a fresh start, a fresh audience. A lot of people are pining for a second season, and even if that doesn't happen, the potential chance for a greater success could set a precedent in the industry to take more chances on animated shows like this, ones that fall into the camp of TV-14 and above without being an action fantasy show based on a pre-existing IP. It's been a while since I watched the show in full, so I probably won't be going into specific plot points or episodes, but I think that's probably for the best in terms of just a more straightforward recommendation kind of video as opposed to a full-on review. Back when the trailer released of the show around August, September of last year, I pretty much knew it was going to be amazing off of that alone because purely from an artistic perspective, this is probably among the best looking animated shows ever. And I am including anime in this, by the way. The top three is probably like, in no specific order, Primal, Sunny Boy, and then this show. It's hard to even begin to describe what about it makes it so good because it does so many things right and absolutely nothing wrong. Though I guess the first thing that really sticks out to you about this is that there is nothing else on television, past or present, and probably future too, unfortunately, that looks like this. I mean, it's very clearly indebted to the artwork of French graphic novelist Moebius with the trademark mixture of both maximalism and minimalism, and also the biological approach it takes to science fiction with the curation of settings and worlds which feel so much like a living, breathing ecosystem despite not even remotely resembling what we're accustomed to registering as organic life here on Earth. But in terms of animation, the only other points of reference I can give to this are Nausicaa and maybe Fantastic Planet, and those two are both very different from this stylistically. And this is important because actually seeing these things in motion is what makes it feel like a different beast entirely, especially because the animation itself, divorced from the designs on a base level, is integral to what makes the style of the show work so well. A good example of this is how, similar to the mixture of minimalist and maximalist design, the animation is something which is simultaneously extremely fluid yet very limited, using very minimal frame rates, even more minimal than the 12 frames per second standard of anime, to convey so much life with so few individual drawings. I've taken in a lot of different kinds of science fiction media, but this is one of the very few which feels genuinely alien. Nowadays, it's so easy to just bullshit different races and species and worlds on other planets because of how certain tropes have just become intrinsically woven into the fabric of sci-fi, but this show manages to feel completely unique in everything that it does. The world of Scavengers Reign is probably the coolest science fiction setting I've seen since I first read Blam. Every scene, every frame is just this endless stream of new ideas and concepts that never
runs out of steam, even at the very end.
So much is packed into the show, even if it doesn't feel that way because of how simplistic the actual plot is once once again adding to that motif I mentioned earlier. Juggling even just one journey through this planet would be a significant challenge for lesser shows to continuously engage the audience in the way this show does, but we get to see the perspectives of 3 different groups of characters and their journeys through completely different biomes, meeting completely different creatures, and facing completely different obstacles in every episode. And yet, despite this, there was such a fully realized aesthetic cohesion amongst everything present. It's so easy to become invested into this world because of how believable it is to buy into the idea that this really is a functioning ecosystem that acts as a massive web of different organisms, predators, prey, seasons, all functioning as one to create a sustainable environment, which somewhat ties into the themes of the show, but I'll get into that later. A lot of it really comes down to the atmosphere that really brings it all together. Take the intro, for example. It's quiet, it's subdued, and it has this tinge of melancholy underneath it all. It allows you to really take in and immerse yourself into this strange and ethereal land, and the soundtrack of the whole show definitely helps in this regard. I wouldn't call the show slow-paced or anything, but it exercises a level of restraint in its presentation that I really appreciate, and it works really well for conveying this otherworldly tone. A good example of this is how most of the stuff in the world isn't given a concrete explanation or understanding, though without feeling confusing either, and so you're left with the same cautious alienation as the characters. And it's also what makes the more intense moments of the show all that more memorable, when the show brings you back to reality that while nature can be beautiful, this is also a dangerous, horrifying, and hostile planet with forces beyond our comprehension that can kill us at any given moment. My personal favorite way that the show does this is through the repeated usage of body horror in various different contexts. I consider myself a bit of a connoisseur of animated body horror, and I can safely say that this is some incredibly high-grade shit, both in the viscerality and the uncomfortable detail of it all, but also in how it adds to the overall fear of the unknown, the inhuman, as human bodies betray their natural forms and become distorted into the hostile, alien environment surrounding it. Alien. I keep using this word because I think it describes the show as a whole in a brief phrase, but in a much deeper way than merely aesthetics. Yeah, I've been praising how amazing this show is on a technical level for the past few minutes, but in reality, it's really the writing which makes it such an interesting show to discuss. The characters, the themes, reflecting upon these things and their significance in the overall narrative. This is a show that would have already been pretty enjoyable even with writing that was just merely serviceable at best, but the way it goes the extra mile to give something beyond just cool visuals and infuses real meaning and emotion into its story is what makes the difference between a good show and a great show. Because yes, while it is incredibly alien, as I've said, it's also, at the same time, deeply human. The plot itself I described in the intro is a pretty standard science fiction story on base level, but this simplistic skeleton of the narrative allows the show to focus entirely on the characterization. Like I said, the show's split between 3 different perspectives, each one being a duo of sorts between 2 characters. So while the dread of isolation is the main thing affecting them physiologically, it is the hell of other people, the interactions between characters, that serve as the other half of the narrative's conflict. We have Ursula and Sam, who are both human, Ozzy and Levi, human and robot, and finally Cayman, it's pronounced Cayman, I mispronounced it, everyone's gonna be fucking complaining, I know, I'm not re-recording this audio, fuck you. And Hollow, human and alien creature. And a couple side characters occasionally pop up throughout the show in addition to that. Each character is distinct in their own way, with personality traits deliberately designed to contradict one another and incite tension, which is most obvious when juxtaposing the halves of each pair against one another. Ursula and Sam are the most conventional of the 3, both being humans, and their dynamic between one another is the most congruent as a result of that. While Ursula is a bit more empathetic and Sam is more of a tough guy, they are still able to work together and care for one another regardless. On a base level, they may seem like the least interesting sounding of the 3, given that they're the least prone to conflict, both internal and external, and I think the show knows this, and so, put very broadly as to not spoil anything, it challenges this notion and asks the characters if they are willing to have faith in one another, willing to have faith in other people in general, even after their trust in one another proves not to be absolute. I wish I could talk more about them as much as I can the other characters, but doing so would probably ruin the experience for those wanting to go in unspoiled. Ozzy and Levi are a grade below that in terms of compatibility, and the switch from human to robot is symbolic of that. Ozzy is a generally asocial person, and her relationship with Levi Levi is perfect for her because it's the facade of companionship in an artificial, unconscious intelligence that mimics human behavior and speech to feel like someone's really there. It's essentially a master-slave dynamic that doesn't require the psychological burden of emotional attachment and consideration of someone else's needs. Because as cold as uncaring as that phrase sounds, it is kind of true to an extent. But when Levi's artificial body starts becoming affected by the environment, causing them to develop an actual consciousness, that's when things start going wrong. The abnormal behaviors Levi begins exhibiting, the development of empathy and individuality, for example, reflects upon what being human really means beyond our conventional understandings of mind and body. Because it's these exact things which Ozzy, a person who's afraid of connecting to others, finds inconvenient as just something to get rid of within Levi. It's not just interesting emotionally, but morally as well. If you were to revert Levi back to their previous intelligence, one without awareness of self, how close is that to taking a life? Is this functionally lobotomizing someone or something? These are concepts a lot of science fiction media toy with, especially ones involving artificial intelligence, but this one actually made me think about those ideas in a surprisingly fresh and unique way that you don't get much of after reading every cyberpunk manga known to man. And as the story progresses and the rift between the two grows larger and larger, Ozzy is forced to reconcile with the sustainability of these asocial tendencies, as she's caught between the cold drive for survival and the very real empathy that she's buried for so long. Levi is one of my favorite characters here. They've got the most definitive character development and arc, and it leads to some of the most interesting moments in the series. Ozzy, meanwhile, while not being the first character we meet, really takes upon the role of central protagonist in the last third of the show, becoming the core of the narrative even after her isolationism for what preceded it. Then there's Common and Hollow, where Common is the final tier of total ostracization from others, for many reasons that I'll get into, and he stays with Hollow only for the reason that he's able to feed from it. It is this really fucked up, codependent relationship where he knows it's wrong, but stays anyways because the short-term satiation matters more to him than the inevitable downfall in the long term. This is where the story really delves into its darkest and most disturbing moments. Those who have watched the show might disagree with me in pairing Common and Hollow in the same way I paired the other one so far, which really speaks to just how fucked up their relationship is and how Common truly is alone in a different way from everyone else. I know it's probably an unpopular opinion to say this, but Common is my personal favorite character. Part of this comes down to personal taste. With him and the nature of his hallucinatory symbiotic relationship with Hollow, you get a lot of psycho-surrealist stuff that I find to be some of the most unique and compelling parts of the show, both visually and narratively. And as for Hollow, it's not really a character so much as it is just a force, but on that front, it is incredibly effective. It really taps into the subtle horror influences the show has, and coming from a person who can really only feel fear from television and film in the works of David Lynch, it genuinely was creeping me out. But anyways, what makes Common an interesting character to me is that he's a character who struggles with self-hatred and insecurity and feeling unloved by others, and he's absolutely right to do so. Common is a fuck-up. He's pathetic, a failure, a loser, incompetent. He resigns himself to escapism and wallowing in his own misery the first chance he gets, and he knows this. But how can you not be depressed when most other people would be glad to see you kill yourself and are right to feel so? It's similar to a character like Shinji from Evangelion or AJ from The Sopranos, where your tolerance of a character with no admirable character traits is going to be dependent on how much you can relate to their experiences. And I think the question of whether or not you could forgive Common if you were put in this show's situation is a genuinely nuanced topic of discussion that really reflects what the show is attempting to convey in its themes of human connection. The show works like this. With 5 main characters and even more supporting ones, no one character is incredibly deep or complex on an individual level, but what makes them so compelling and interesting regardless is how they all interlink with one another. They are characters who are ultimately stronger as a collective rather than in isolation. A large part of what makes this show so interesting for a first-time watch is gradually piecing together the web of how these characters connect to one another. The show often delves into flashbacks of the characters' lives, specifically their time in the Demeter 227, which is the name of the ship they traveled in, allowing a glimpse into moments revealing the relationships between characters who never even speak to each other in the present, or characters that weren't able to survive the crash. And seeing stuff like this contextualizes the significance on their journey not just on a literal level, but on an emotional and psychological one as well. well, making the weight of their estrangement all the more heavy. Aside from human connection, I think that the main theme of the show is adaptation, change in response to new environments. Every character here goes through an arc that is essential in forcing them to survive by accepting what is around them and adapting to it accordingly rather than staying the same and rejecting new factors. And that right there, along with the ability to find empathy for one another and connect with one another because we are stronger together, is the core of the show. Ever since March of 2020, I've noticed, and I'm sure that you've noticed too, this very stark and worrying increase in a complete death of the concept of human empathy amongst a large portion of the population, at least in America. Massive hordes of people falling into total misanthropic insulation, where anybody outside of what they've deemed acceptable for their hyper-rigid bubble of acceptable behavior is just not even worth considering as a person with emotions and a life outside your own, but rather just an obstacle, an enemy, something they'd probably take satisfaction in gruesomely murdering if given the chance. It's nerve-wrackingly depressing. It's like watching someone kill themselves in real time, except on a societal level, and you can do nothing. All you can do is watch. It's naive to ask, why can't we all just get along? But if we don't ask that question, sooner or later, we're going to destroy ourselves. It's that or death, and that is what I get most out of Scavengers Reign on a thematic level. Isolation, on principle, is unsustainable. No man is an island. Every character in the show would have most likely ended up dead if not for the presence of others. And even when it shows the flip side of coexistence, the side that is painful and flawed and conflicted, it is a pain that is ultimately worth going through. I think this show is great. I think it's so great that I honestly wouldn't even be too upset if it never got a second season, because even with a somewhat open-ended conclusion, it still works as a cohesive and standalone story. Coincidentally, a lot of my favorite anime also happen to be around 12 to 13 episodes. But if any show deserves more, it's this one. Like I said, the fact that it's even getting a second chance to begin with is amazing, and I would rather see more of this than like 90% of the other shit they fund on Netflix. Either way, just watch the show, please. Like, it's just a really good fucking show. Out of every animated show I've ever watched in my life, this one borders on being in the top 5. One of, like, my mom's friend's husband, he likes this show. This random fucking middle-aged man who doesn't even watch animated shows, he likes this show. When my mom told me that, I was really surprised. It made me finally realize something I've been debating for a while, that serious animated shows and films are not this hyper-niche and unprofitable thing that the out-of-touch corporate executives in charge have made it out to be. This is the kind of show that you would be willfully stupid not to at least get something out of. So please, watch the show, let it live up to the potential it clearly both deserves and is more than capable of. Follow me on Twitter. Thanks for watching.
You gotta kill yourself.